Welcome to the Beret podcast, where I bring together a variety of experts in the field of helping you live a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling life. Thanks for joining us today. Hey, question for you. Do you know of anyone out there who's making a difference in the world, helping other people improve their lives, but doesn't get the spotlight they deserve? Hit me up in the comments so I can reach out to them and get their story known. Thanks. All right, let's get to it. Hello and welcome. I am here with Dr. David Daugherty, here to share his experience helping people find purpose as a means of healing from psychological trauma. David, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thank you. So tell us a little bit about who you are and expound a little bit on that. What do you do?
Wow. Whew, man.
Small question.
Yeah, who am I? That's like broad. That's kind of like the question that I ask people. I ask other people to kind of help them on their journey. It's like, who are you? You know, and then
you have 2 seconds to talk about the meaning of the universe.
Well, that's question number 2. You know, it's like, who are you? And while you're mulling over that, let me throw the second one at you. What's the meaning of the universe? Or why are you here? So, yeah, I think who self-discovery, I think, is something that takes an entire lifetime, and I don't even know if anybody fully gets to it, but we do hopefully get more aware as we the longer we spend on Earth. So let's see, I've been around about half a century. Was born and raised in the Northeast, and I know that we cross paths because of our military backgrounds as veterans, and you know, that's a chapter in itself, the whole military thing. And the life that I live now was kind of built on that foundation of like growing up and trying to find purpose, and then being drawn into the military, doing that, just going all the way with it for as long as I could. And then sort of like bouncing out of that, finding myself having to find new purpose and being faced with the question, who am I? At the same time, sort of cataclysmically at the same time, discovering, you know, I'm addicted to alcohol, and I'm loaded down with all kinds of trauma on top of trauma, and it just kept piling up. And so I just started in 2009, I started trying to fix that, trying to unwind that. And then 2010 actually was able to put down the bottle, put the plug in the jug, as they say, and get sober. And what I discovered was sobriety only starts with abstaining from putting some sort of chemical inside my body, but now living organically, you know, like without anything altering, you know, my brain chemistry. And getting sober meant like, you know, gaining clarity of mind, gaining real situational awareness, you know, learning about relationships, learning about what it means to survive, or more than survive, thrive, you know, live. And so that's kind of been a whole different life for the last 14 or 15 years. And what I find myself consistently going back to is helping others like at their start. So I keep finding myself in situations like I call them God assignments. My higher power, whom I choose to call God, they just kind of land in front of me, or I get a very strong unction to go in a direction, and I find something at a beginning stage. It's either a person who's sort of, you know, groping about trying to figure out how to restart their life, or maybe it's a program, you know, that's just getting off the ground that might have something to do with veterans. And I end up sort of looking for that way to impact, to help either in an institution, healthy institution become culturally aware of who they're serving or what they're about. And with an individual, is sort of like that question, who are you? You know, and then they get to a certain point in life, and then they go, okay, got it, Dave. I got it from here, and they kind of move on. So, and then somebody else shows up. So, yeah.
So it sounds like in a way you help both organizations and people figure out who they are and what they're about.
Yes, that is exactly what I do.
And is there a certain population you focus on?
So I really get a kick out of working with adolescents, but it's most of what I've been doing since 2010 has been with veterans. Like, these are just my people. You know what I mean? It's like, we're family. It's like, I know you, oh, you tell me what your job was and what component of the service you were in. It's like, yeah, I got it. So almost, I'd say 80% veterans, and then like 20%, juvies, I call them juveniles, kids. So yeah, families is always part of it. So, yeah.
So I love how you talked a little bit about your healing journey and that pointed you in the direction. Can you talk a little bit about how your healing journey might have maybe paralleled your work in this?
Yeah, the work really evolved out of it.
Okay.
And so, okay, when the restart happened for me, I started with almost nothing. I had shelter, and I had a little bit of food, and that was it. So it was like, and then I had a lot of pain, a lot of anxiety, because there was so much unknown, but there was also a lot of trauma that had been buried for, decades. And so that's what I had. I had anxiety, emotional pain, some shelter, and some food. And just at that point, I could do whatever I wanted. So maybe I had some memories too, because throughout my journey up to that point, I'd had some good experiences, lots of good experiences, and there were some things that really resonated. And one of those things was Messianic Judaism. Okay, which, so depending on the different people have different ideas about what that is, but fundamentally, we believe in God as very similar to what Christians would believe in, that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but there's this Jewish context. So the Jews aren't really comfortable with us, and the Christians aren't really comfortable with us. But I'd had some encounters with Messianic Judaism throughout my life, and my mother was Jewish, and I really was like in this beginning, going down to the DNA with the question, who am I? Like my belief that God was real was unshakable. I just needed the right context, and I needed the right people. And so with no place I had to be, no job, nobody really cared where I was, to be honest with you, at that point. So I gravitated in that direction. And before that, like while in the military, I constantly mulled over what felt like a calling into some kind of ministry. And of course, we knew chaplains in the military. So I was thinking, well, chaplain, that's pretty cool. You can kind of like be in ministry, but kind of be out there mixing it up. And I kind of like that idea, plus there was like lots of education required. And I was really up for that kind of challenge. I thought that'd be cool. I wanted letters, after my name, because I was seeking validation. All these things kind of drove me in a certain direction. So when I found my synagogue, my home, where I, really started with all this, I started interacting with the rabbi quite a bit, and I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do, And I had veterans benefits, I had GI Bill, I had folk rehab, and so I started on that journey in pursuit of becoming a Messianic rabbi. But that diverted over into mental health. So I got a year of yeshiva training, which is like seminary. And then I went into a 2-year Master of Arts program in counseling with a specialization in marriage and family. And so to answer your question specifically, where I'm getting to, where it crosses over, is, at that point, I'd been through a lot of treatment. God would be like, okay, you're done with this program. Now go to this program, And so now, after doing that several times, I found myself a grad student. And, I'd be in class, and, it's night school. So all my classmates were like retired Navy, like everybody was in the second career kind of phase. And there'd be the professor who's like moonlighting. They've got their private practice during the day, and they'd be talking about cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy or, some other, family systems theory. And I'd be like, listening and be like, yeah, that works. Oh, no, that doesn't work. Because I had personal experience with all these things. And so that's where I started to realize, like, oh, this might actually be a strength, because I was able to see where I would be able to bring quality empathy, into like the clinical environment, to the therapeutic environment, because they would talk about boundaries. And Don't be compassionate when you're working with a client, because compassion can get you, tangled up in transference, countertransference, and all this stuff, right? But you have to have empathy, and if you're not capable of empathy, you have to at least pretend. These are the things that they would say. And I would be like, well, actually, I know what it means to suffer, in the way that people who will come to me as a clinician, I will have personal experience with that. And so this formal education is teaching me, ethics and proper boundaries, but I have this morality, and I think that's kind of how I ended up gravitating towards veterans, because I relate.
It's interesting because I feel like it is so important. The empathy is so important for connection with someone. And I was just thinking about, like, where would that mindset come from? And I would imagine that, like, the field of psychology is a relatively new on the field, relatively new in the field of medicine, and in a major way. And I could definitely see there being stories of that going wrong, especially when you get into someone's, like, emotional needs and all of that. Like, there can definitely be some ugly situations that might arise. But what comes to me is the idea that the kind of the biomedical background, the biomedical paradigm, where I am here to cut, slice, dice, fix, sew up, all that, and I shouldn't get too involved because I'm just here to fix the problem. Versus what you're talking about is, in psychology, empathy seems to be actually, like, such a crucial role. It plays such a crucial role in your ability to get into someone's psyche and help them fix what's there. Has that been your experience? And do I characterize that correctly in your mind?
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying, and I completely agree with it. I think that, all these things, what's come up already in our conversation, what may come up, they're two-edged swords. Like, they're, to properly evaluate a person, you have to bring objectivity, and we even do that with our friends. It's like a friend, never mind all the clinical work, say a friend comes, I call you and I'm crying, something's happened, and you're probably going to empathize. You might even sympathize. You might feel compassion, but when you're ready to, like, step up and be a friend, you're looking for that right time to bring in the objectivity, so that I don't get so lost in my emotions that, things get distorted and just get worse. That's kind of why I'm leaning on you. So in that regard, in the clinical context, or what I like to call the industry, in the industry, because it is an industry, when we talk about formal clinical stuff, where there's a transaction, to provide this service. Psychologists are the absolute best at it. The PhD with a license in psychology, or the PSYD, same thing, right? With a license in psychology, their bread and butter is to bring these instruments with them. They're on their laptop, they're on their hard drive, and they ask all these questions, and it's a lot of it's yes and no, and very little of it is narrative. It's very, it's numeric. And when you hit certain, when you hit the right numerical code, then boom, a diagnosis pops out. And that's a starting point. Now, when the psychologist hands me that evaluation and says, this person, is antisocial personality disorder, and then I get into their story a little bit and I start hearing what they've been through, they might experience empathy the first time in their life. I might be being a little bit hyperbolic at the moment, but essentially on a basic level, So I find that a lot, to be able to bring empathy. With empathy, you can maintain healthy boundaries in a clinical environment, but you can see past the diagnosis. The diagnosis is important. It gives a framework, but to be able to see the person as a human, and then actually have the ability to bring that human understanding across in their personal plight might bring them out in a way that they've never expressed in their whole life.
And not just in the, I believe, not just in the diagnostic part, but being able to dig into someone's background. Every single person has such a unique story, and you kind of alluded to learning what people have gone through. But I think we tend to, in the field, we tend to look at people very simplified, and it's kind of taught that way in a lot of medical fields, where it's a system of inputs and outputs, and you just fix the right wiring and then send them on their way. But it's like there's so much involved in that wiring that we're only beginning to get a faint glimpse of. And like you talked about, that person's story is much of what wrote the code, or wired the wiring in that person's brain. And so to really kind of dig in beyond the diagnosis and understand what's behind it, I believe is probably like it's the main way to a successful long-term healing. At least in my experience, you have to dig into the root causes, what I like to call the earliest dominoes that you can find, instead of just trying to correct the latter dominoes. So
Absolutely. I agree. I'm not even sure at this point. I'm like, wow, where's this conversation going to go? Because the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I was saying, go ahead. I was about to say something, and then you started. I want to see where you're going.
Yeah, gotcha. The first thing that comes to mind is, kind of going back to the question, who are you? And what you were saying sort of just brought to mind, how frequently people become sort of frightened by that question, and it's my belief that at the core, we're kind of all the same. There's a spirit inside of us. And, if there's, can I talk about God as I understand him? If there's a God, if there's a God in and around the universe, who claims to be good, that doesn't necessarily make sense to us all the time, because our sense of justice, it's not, this person has done terrible things and they did terrible things to me. How could a loving God ever forgive them? And yet, if God is nothing but good, how could he not love them and forgive them and want the best for them? So that means there has to be something at the core of that person who's done horrible things. There has to be something within them that's redeemable, And so, and again, I ask the question a lot, to people I'm working with, clients right now, like, who are you? And sometimes they get scared because it's like, oh, well, the belief system kicks in. It's like, I'm a terrible person because I did terrible things, or, and it might not even be that terrible, but it's how they feel at the time, So
it's the you are what you do. And in some cases, some people take that as in, I'm a father, this is my career, I'm a husband, all that. Or in other people take it as, these are the things I've done, these things define me. And you're saying that it's actually much deeper than any of those things.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even answer the question. You asked me at the beginning, like, who are you? I don't know. But the closest I've been able to get is like, share some of my experiences. That's the closest I've been able to get. And from that point, like, you will derive your own idea, and it may be more accurate than me.
I've heard it said a couple of different things. I've heard it said, maybe that I might be misremembering the quote, but you can't know who someone is, but you can get to know them.
I like that. I'm gonna have to like keep that one. You can't know who someone is, but you can get to know them. Yeah. Familiarity. Well, I think go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think marriage is probably a good example of that, where there's nothing more intimate in human relations than a marriage, and yet you get to know that person over a lifetime. So
yeah. And not only will my relationship be different than every other person's relationship with that spouse, just like it is with anyone, your relationship with anyone will be different than anyone else's relationship with that person, because a relationship is the joining of two different lives together in a certain way, and it never looks the same way. It even with the same person over time, it changes. And so you may not be able to ever get to the core of that person, because they're so complex and there's so many things in there, but you can get to know them even though you may never get to the point where you can say you know them absolutely completely to their core. So this is the type of work that you do with someone. You help them. It sounds like you help them get to know themselves.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, to the best of my ability, or to the best that they're willing or their ability.
So how do
It's
you walk them
interesting,
through that process?
man. I suppose there are some consistent things, because as humans, we have some standardized responses, and then part of that also is the cultural component. There's some predictability with teenagers, and there's some predictability with veterans, and also, you know, first responders to a degree as well. And like with teenagers, it's kind of like, oh, so you have to go to counseling because your parents are stupid, huh? And they're like, oh, how'd you know that? And I'm like, I don't know, just a wild guess. It's like, because every teenager thinks they're smarter than their parents, you know what I mean? And then it's just like, you just kind of get the ball rolling from there. With veterans, kind of tying into the last point is, we are, okay. Some of the predictability comes from the brain wiring, like we're talking about. So in the early 90s, Department of the Navy did some research on, is basic military indoctrination within the Defense Department, is it effective? In other words, does it effectually change who a person is? And the bottom line is, on a fairly basic level, yes. Right. So a person who enlists and goes into any boot camp or basic training, and then goes through a skills training after that, when they come out the other side, fully qualified member of the military at the basic level, their brain has been rewired. And so you're still like your parents' kid, but you're also a sailor, a soldier, a Marine. That is with you now, and it's with you forever. Which doesn't mean it's going to stay exactly the same. You're also going to evolve as we grow and evolve and go through human growth and development, retire, do those kind of things, right? But your brain has been changed. And
it's a formative experience, and especially it's a formative experience that everyone in your sphere has undergone. So it's kind of like resetting your family in a way.
Ooh, wow. Yes, absolutely. So the culture component runs deep, really deep. And one of the things that we as veterans, what we bring into a scenario when we start trying to manage our problems, is that that basic conditioning to solve problems. Right? It's like whether you're an E1 or an O10, there's something inside of us that says, this problem is mine. I must fix it. Right? And it's like, when today's problem's been fixed, completely fixed, right? Tomorrow brings a new one, and we just do this over and over. So a vet showing up, say, at a treatment center, in like a intensive outpatient center where they're going to spend 3 or 5 hours every day, 5 days a week for the next month or 2 months, dealing with, drinking too much, and they've got PTSD, right? It's like, some of them will come in and they're like, pretty guarded, they're just like, I don't trust anything, I don't trust anybody, and then you got the other one that comes in and goes, I have a problem and I'm going to fix it. I've got 30 days. I'm going to get some answers, and I'm going to go back to my life. I'm going to fix my marriage, and I'm going to take my kids fishing, and it's going to be great. Right. And it's like, okay, you have a problem. We've acknowledged that. And now you have this idea that you're going to fix it just like that. Like, that's pretty predictable. It's like, you know what? Actually, it's kind of like this. Here's how the human race works: is we don't fix our inherent problems and then, put them away where they need to be and then get a whole new set of problems. Like, yeah, that happens on some level. We end up in different circumstances. We have new traumatic experiences sometimes. But by and large, part of who we are is we're working on that throughout our whole life. Right? So I go into treatment because I have a drinking problem, but really I have a David problem. So I just need to put the drinking aside so I can start really working on me. And again, that is sobriety.
And that touches on something that is so absolutely crucial in my own experience, that most people are so focused on the symptom that they'll never actually address the problem. And usually it kind of goes one of two ways in my experience, where when someone has a socially unacceptable problem, usually they fall into two camps where, or one side of the spectrum anyway, they tend to embrace the brokenness, embrace the dysfunction, and claim it as their identity. And like they just go full force into it and like, this is who I am. And the other side of things absolutely like condemns themselves. They are horrible. They are like everything about, because they did this thing, because they do this thing, they are absolutely horrible. And the problem is neither of those actually get to the core of the problem, core of the issue. And usually the core of the issue is several layers beneath the symptom, usually many layers beneath the symptom. But because people react to the symptom in those two ways, either condemning or embracing, they never actually take the time to dig into the actual core of it. And so what you're talking about in that, like removing that fear, removing the condemnation, removing the stuff that's in the way of that, it's really the only hope for actual permanent healing, to where you don't even have to wrestle with the symptom. The symptom's just gone. Is that reflective of your experience?
Yes, on a couple of different levels. And so I've got a couple of experiences I can share. One is my personal experience where, when this journey began for me, I was just driven, and not in the way of like in the military when we get motivated to like accomplish, but I mean, I was really driven towards life. And the only solution at that point was like, I mean, I was helpless, and hey, ex-Green Beret here, like saying this publicly, I was helpless, guys, and turning to God. But that was terrifying because it felt like as soon as I did, like he didn't want to wait. He wanted to drill right down to the spirit, just past all the symptoms and stuff. And I was like, whoa, like what's happening here? And just being willing to let go. And, it's like that terrifying experience where you're just like completely exposed for who you are. It's like what people are afraid of, and, but he made me feel safe in that way. The other experience is, I shared earlier, I get these like God assignments, and several years ago, I got to be a part of the launch of a veterans treatment court, where veterans who get, they get arrested, and thrown into the justice system, and there are court programs available where, as a diversion from criminal court, they get assigned to a problem-solving court that is culture specific. And essentially what they look for is some sort of nexus between their point of arrest and, something to do with their military service. So typically you say you've got your average, but you've got your infantry guy who, several deployments and everything, and they're dealing with rage, and they're self-medicating with alcohol or drugs, and they get a DUI, or, it might be a domestic, something that has to do with their rage. And so that's an easy connection. They get, if they get assigned to a veterans treatment court, they're accountable to the judge for a year, maybe up to 2 years. And during that time, they're drug tested. There's case management to address all the other parts of their life that's gone awry, and they're in treatment of some kind, and the reason why the program is so long is because inevitably, for a person who's struggling with symptoms, as we're calling it in this conversation, if we're not addressing the symptoms, the Dave problem is going to show up, right? So over the course of a year, I might be, doing great. But if that underlying issue has not been addressed, I might find myself getting arrested again and have to spend a weekend in jail and have, but then there's this building up because of the culture and the other veterans come alongside, this kind of thing, let's get it right. You step back a phase, we add a couple of months onto your program, and still at the end you succeed, your charges are reduced or dismissed, and you get to move on with your life, a whole new you. So we started this program and we went out beating the brush looking for veterans, and we pulled together a half a dozen veterans. And I was able to pull them together as a cohort. And you know, it's like they helped each other more than I was able to help them, or the judge. Really, it was all the things, but it was that peer-to-peer thing, right? So the camaraderie was strong. And about a year, yeah, a little over a year, maybe 14, 16 months from the launch of the program, it was time for me to move on. You know, I left the agency I was working for, and went and followed up with one of the veterans, one of the stronger guys that was in the group. And, you know, so, and during the program, like, I would make house calls because I was everything. I was the counselor. I was also the case manager. I was the drug tester. They were like, okay, Dave, this is your deal, so do it. So I had to do everything. So I was, you know, being in their environment was pretty natural. So I was following up with some guys on my way out, and he had just graduated the program. So I was following up with him, and went to his house, and, you know, he welcomed me with open arms, gave me a big hug and everything. And then, like, took me out back, and he was, you know, taking an old engine out of a mobile home and putting a new engine into the mobile home. And there was some guys around, very productive, very industrious environment. He was stoned out of his mind. I mean, he was wasted and handling himself like a champion, you know, high functioning guy. And I was, you know, kind of disappointed about that, you know, and then kind of picked up on where he was taking his life after that, you know. And what you were talking about the different levels, and what we accept and what we don't accept, is what really struck me about this guy. Like, he was like a kingpin in the program while he was there. He brought wisdom and insight, consistency. He stayed sober, never got in trouble, nothing. Professional, you know. And now, as soon as he's done with the program, went back to smoking weed and just being a biker, you know. And he said to me, you know, and I brought it up, you know, and he said to me, "It's who I am." And I'm like, I have no response to that. Like, my opinion doesn't matter. Like, I don't think that's who you are. But, and really, he wasn't talking about the drugs. He was talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. He had embodied trauma so deeply that that's all he knew. And he was not going to let it go at that moment, if that's what he wants, you know? So anyway.
When someone's pain or their medication of that pain becomes their identity. Yeah. It's
for the quiet.
Yeah. It's, and even in times where that, I've seen it a lot in, like, people who give up certain addictions, where if they don't heal what you call the Dave problem, the person problem, if they don't heal the deeper stuff, which I would say a lot of it goes back to some form of trauma, usually that they're medicating, in my experience anyway. But if they don't heal the stuff that's underneath of it, they often just end up trading up symptoms, going from one to the other. Like, they'll give up smoking, but they'll take up drinking. They'll give up drinking, but they'll take up video games. And it doesn't matter what it is, because it's all about medicating the pain that they're not able to really dig in and heal. And I have honestly, I have nothing against medication, but it's when the medication prevents the healing. I think that's the core of addiction, is when the medication is done instead of the healing.
I agree. And that's the direction that the industry is moving.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody's talked about that on the show.
Feel free.
So with the opioid epidemic, you know, massive problem, is an epidemic, still is, was much worse when it first happened. There had to be solutions, and the industry complex, in its objectivity, lacking the insight about, like, the existential perspective, or the purpose and meaning side of things, or, you know, replacing this false sense of identity of self-medicating my trauma with something real. They don't look at it that way. And so they're Typically, and especially on the medical side, we'll replace one chemical with another. This one chemical, it's illegal and it creates erratic behavior. So let's transfer them over to substitutes, say methadone, for instance. And I'm not against methadone, by the way, but I'm just saying, like that, transferring them from here, from these illicit, illegal substances that cause chaos in a person's life, to a more controlled environment where they're going into a clinic every morning to get their opioid shot, right? If there's still nothing else that's bringing them deeper into what's the Dave problem, then it just creates a new dependency, and it just goes on. And because the opioid epidemic was so profound, the federal government has endorsed this, and it is essentially pervading every other aspect of the recovery environment. So, and what I mean is, say, take, for example, 12-step programs, right? Well, 12-step programs have had to evolve as well. Say the oldest one, the original gangsta, Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So, I mean, they had a really hard time evolving over the decades about people who sort of identified or felt most comfortable in an AA environment, but their drug of choice might be heroin or cocaine. And so there was a lot of struggle with that. And now bring into also, there is a constant struggle to define sobriety, right? Like, as I said, sobriety is like clarity of mind, and then applying that in life. Well, when a person is dependent on a substance, how do they pursue clarity of mind? When one dependence has been replaced with another, then I'm not actually doing the work, because why should I?
So I have a question about that, and your experience working in these spheres and your focus on helping people find their identity means that you're a perfect person to ask this question. In my experience, many people who go through the AA type programs, the first thing they're taught to do, they're taught to say, like, hello, my name is so-and-so, and I am an alcoholic. And I understand the bit about being honest with yourself and being honest with your propensity towards a certain type of addiction and that sort of thing. I understand that, but in my experience and my perception, I find that I have found that ends up limiting someone in the kind of the way that you're talking about, is they own this as, this is who I am and this is who I will always be. And it seems to me like that sort of thinking would never allow them to, one, address the deeper identity problem, and two, to grow beyond, like, actually healing from this, where it's no longer a problem. Like, those seem like to be some core issues with that methodology. Is that something that you share, or do you have a different way of thinking about it?
I do share that perspective. However, there's caveats to it, in my opinion, right? So I can look at a problem from any angle, from different angles, and I can see the good and the bad from all the different angles, right? So say, let's go to the core issue of the brain. Addiction is not only like issues with the cerebral cortex, where I've developed beliefs, that I have to, have this, but where that actually comes from is the core of the brain, the limbic system. And that's where our instincts are. So if I'm in, say I'm an addict in active addiction, or I'm an alcoholic and, deep in my alcoholism, if I do not put the chemical in my brain, the part of my brain that like has this hard charging drive to make sure that I breathe, that I reproduce, that I eat, that my basic needs get met. When those basic needs don't get met, the limbic system gets elevated, right? And it's like hunger pains, right? The longer you go without eating, the more your brain tells you, eat. If you don't eat, you will die. This is a life and death kind of thing.
the limbic system is the emotional center. Is that correct? Like that's where the emotions kind of come from, build from.
Yes. Well, yes, they're connected to that. And that's part of the way the messaging comes out is through the emotions. And with addiction, things get twisted up. Because if I'm addicted to alcohol and I stop, well, let's use cocaine, because with cocaine, there's no physical dependence. It's completely like a psychological dependence, right? But it's real. And here's how it's real. If I do so much cocaine over a period of time that I have flipped my limbic system over to being addicted, psychologically addicted, when I stop doing the cocaine, I go into what's called post-acute withdrawal, post-acute withdrawal syndrome. My limbic system starts screaming at the rest of my brain that says, if you don't put cocaine in me, you're going to die, which is exactly the opposite of the truth. So here's like the good and the bad of saying, of a person saying, with 10 years of sobriety, the good and the bad of saying, I'm an alcoholic. Hey, my name's David, I'm an alcoholic, right? Is when I do that, I remind myself not to pick up a drink. So that's the positive reinforcement, the good reinforcement, because the reality is I have flipped over my limbic system. If I pick up a drink, I don't know if I'll put it back down, right? Because the limbic system has physiologically changed. That is the fact of addiction. And not everybody who's drank terribly and gotten DUIs and destroyed their family has done that to their limbic system. And that creates confusion too, but that's another story, right? And then
but
the downside,
their wiring has a propensity to go that direction. And so it's meant to be a continual reminder not to risk going in that direction, because you might have a propensity to go further.
Correct. Addiction continues to progress. So if I were to it's been 14 years. I'm approaching like 15 years, right? If I pick up a drink, thank you. It's if I pick up a drink now, there's a likelihood that my drinking will get worse faster, because the limbic system is just sitting there waiting. It's just sitting there waiting for the next one, and it's going to go, yes, this is it. This is the thing. Woo! And so on the downside is, like you said, the cultural piece. It's like if I show up to the same meeting every day and I say the same thing, my name is David and I'm an alcoholic. If I'm prone to depression, then I start conveying that message, and then people coming in, they might believe, well, in order to fix my alcohol problem, then I have to get bummed out and I have to deal with this depressing meeting, and all this stuff, right? So that's the downside. There is some amount of like negative reinforcement about the belief system. I think that's what you're getting at as well. So.
Yeah. So let's say someone is struggling right now, and whether it's with addiction or whether it's with addiction or with identity, like just a lack of kind of centered self, or a lack of understanding of who they are, what they're about. First of all, what might they be going through? What are the symptoms that they might be seeing in their life that would clue them into this actually might be what's going on under the surface, this lack of identity and this lack of a core self perception?
Ooh, tough question. I believe that you're asking like a person's just like in an acute state, like it's all the things. They're active addiction, but there's also other, like they're kind of lost as a result of trauma and addiction and all that stuff. And so they're showing up on the scene looking for help, and like what's going on with them, like internally.
Well, so like someone who, for example, who's watching this podcast, they know that something's wrong, but they don't know what it is. And so maybe they're looking a whole bunch of different things, and they come here and they watch this. What might clue them in to the fact that this might be what the core issue is that they need to focus on next?
Wow. Okay. The best way to respond to that is with personal experience. And so discovery is a journey in itself, right? The discovery of self-awareness. And, even before going down to the core of like, who am I, which is a lifelong journey, But like, I have some kind of problem. This was my experience. There was some kind of problem, marital discord. Okay. That is painful. And, maybe in an argument, my wife said, "You're drinking, this wouldn't be half the problem it is if you were just," and me going, I disagree, in a loud, boisterous way, because I'm not aware. To me, my drinking seems normal, and that's a person who's in active addiction. Typically, most of the time, they're doing seems normal to them. It's familiar. And I probably don't recognize the chaos that I'm creating around me, the pain that I'm causing the people who are vulnerable to me, and when I say vulnerable, my wife, my children, closest friends, because they not only have to watch me go through this, but they're experiencing the repercussions. It seems normal for me.
So you're saying that maybe they wouldn't feel it in themselves, but they're noticing in their social circle that people are continually pointing to something that's off, even if it doesn't feel like it in themselves. It feels normal to them, but the people around them are like consistently or continually pointing at something's off about their lives.
9 times out of 10, there is something pointing back at them in the mirror of a relationship. What I mean is, like, whatever kind of, it could be a boss, could be it could be the work environment. It might be at home, in the military, frequently there's somebody in our face, because we're late, type of thing. And the first line of defense of that is to argue against it. I'm not the one with the problem. You're the one with the problem, and you're trying to make your problem my problem. That's kind of typical. But I am in pain, whether I'm only perceiving it as my spouse is causing me this pain. Either way, I'm in pain. So in my personal experience, what happened was I got online, and I'm looking for answers. And I ended up doing a survey, one of those psychological instruments we talked about earlier, just a questionnaire that said, hey, it's very casual, like, hey, if you want to answer these questions, we might be able to give you some information about yourself. Very low key. And I just kind of went through, like, there's either 5 or 10 questions, and click yes, click yes, click yes, click no, click yes. Oh, look at your score, 7 out of 10. If your score is 6 or higher, you might have a problem. So there was nothing really confrontational about it. And in the answer to your question specifically, because there's other ways that confrontation does work, but in most situations, it's usually when a person's alone. And I'll tell you, I probably took that test 5-10 times because it didn't make sense. I'm like, the numbers don't add up. What do you mean 7 out of 10? I might have a drinking problem. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And then I'm like, okay, law of averages here. Maybe there's a problem. And so just being a little bit willing to maybe start doing some exploring, from that point, it just sort of grew and grew and grew until I was, willing to actually, start on a journey. And I'll tell you, for anybody who's actually, listening in the way you said, somebody's watching the podcast and they're wondering, I will say that once starting on this journey, it's hard, but your life is already hard. And the payoff, the reward for every step of progress is far better than anything you're experiencing right now.
So pick your hard.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
So what might be a first couple steps for those people, like a 1, 2, 3, that maybe they've taken a survey or they've noticed something here enough to give them an idea that this is an issue that they need to look into? What might be the first 2, 3 steps that they should look into doing in the next week or two?
Okay. The first thing I would say is pray. And most people won't want to do that. So I understand that. Talking to another person, military veterans. There's like at least one buddy that we're still in touch with somewhere. I will call them from across the country. It's 2 a.m. We're like, yeah, I think I might have a problem. They usually would say something like, well, duh, you think? It's like, all right, what do we do from here kind of thing, but anybody reaching out to another human being, whether it's somebody that we trust, typically, back in the day, if we're talking about alcohol specifically, back in the day, Alcoholics Anonymous did house calls, right? And they would detox people in other people's living rooms and stuff. We don't do that anymore. Typically, going to a treatment center, go to the ER, you can go online and there are call centers 24/7. Every treatment center has got a call center. It's like, which one's closest to me, or what part of the country do you want to go to? Because there's a dozen of them down in Southeast Florida, and they will put you on a plane, man, because they want your business. But that's kind of typically, what happens. But we're not just talking about alcohol. We're talking about people's pain, the trauma, and at some point, a connection to another human being. And that's probably the hardest thing, and that hardest thing, that first step is definitely the hardest step. And actually trusting, first admitting to myself, okay, I might have a problem. To that point, I might even go, you know what? I do have a problem. Even if it's like, I don't fully actualize like I have a problem, I might still recognize like there's something going on, and it's more than I can handle by myself. So connecting to another human being in whatever capacity.
And I would even add the growing prevalence of online groups. I know for me, it was Codependence Anonymous. They had a lot of groups online. I'm pretty sure that there are other groups, other type of groups as well. And just to give someone kind of a softball entrance into, there's a little bit even more anonymity, but just kind of a connection of, I'm not the only one dealing with this. I'm not alone in this, and I'm not crazy. There's other people out there who are struggling with this, who are having progress in this. So the element of hope, giving people hope that there might be a way forward, a way to a life without so much pain.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about the person who's actually in your field, who's working to help other people. And I just have a couple questions for that. On behalf of that person, for you spend your life helping other people get theirs under some kind of control, get their lives better. And that takes a ton of work, a ton of energy, a ton of mental space, emotional space, physical time, all that. How do you maintain your own health while you are acting as a healer for other people?
Yeah, that is the most important thing. Because if I'm not well, the mission will die eventually. I'll burn out and won't be able to help anybody. So there's a straightforward answer, but then there's the reality of what actually happens, and it depends on largely on what I'm doing, what's going on. The basic answer, I can say, I have a program of recovery. I pull a lot from the 12 steps. I remind myself, or I am constantly reminded that there are certain opponents that I cannot beat. Alcohol is one of them, right? So I'm not going to go toe to toe with alcohol, period, because I won't win. In the spiritual realm, we call it Leviathan, right? There's some aspects of evil out there I wasn't meant to go toe to toe with. And so just realizing that, and then the response to that is my dependency on God. And so I'm always working on my conscious contact with my Creator. I don't do it perfectly. And as a human, I frequently duck and evade. And I don't want to talk to you. It's kind of like a parent. You know what I mean? It's like, and all the reasons that an adolescent would avoid a parent is all the reasons that I would, but I am also dependent on my creator. So eventually I come back around. So it's this constant cycle of life, where it's like, okay, the pain has gotten so great. On a more practical level, answering your question is like, my daily stuff, or it's more like weekly at this point. In early sobriety for me, my daily routine was a lot of spiritual food, if you will, which was, prayer, meditation, literature, reading literature, whether it was recovery based, or for me, the Bible, and, fellowship on some level, whether it was people that were, seeking a spiritual solution to their alcohol problem, or, my faith group within my congregation. And, I was pretty needy. So it was like all of that every single day. And not to mention, treatment. And I'm not opposed to even going back to counseling now, and I've been through a lot. So also fitness for me was very important. I spent a lot of time on a bicycle in the early days, just being healthy and getting the blood flowing and clearing out the brain, making room for the healthy chemicals, getting the bad one, the old ones, the burned ones out, and still do that. Today, it's more like on a weekly, it's like, what have I done this week to take care of myself? If I, how many times have I gotten exercise? How many times have I been in connection with my faith community or with somebody in recovery kind of thing? And I can kind of track it like that. In reality, what often happens is sometimes I just kind of end up entrenched in what I'm doing, and it feels like it's 24/7. And it's like, I almost assimilate it to like a military mission, where there are times you're just on the mission and that's all there is. There's some eating and there's some sleeping, there's some basic body functions, and otherwise you're doing the thing. And it's like that sometimes for me, because like this whole, like being involved in startups and being involved with people like launching out, it gets that way. And then it's like, and I'm like, God, I know you're there somewhere. I'm not too happy with you right now because I'm not getting my needs met, and then I find myself kind of what we call circling the drain. Like, I'm not doing well. Now I'm doing less well. Now I'm doing bad, but I'm still trudging along, and 9 times out of 10, there's like some sort of mission completion. And then God provides like a recovery period. It's amazing. He'll put the mission in front of me. I'll do the mission, and then it'll come to an end. There's always an end. And then I'm like alone. I'm like, okay, what do I have to do? Reconnect with God and do all the things that I said. So
it sounds like you're talking about 2 different modes, where you have a kind of sustaining maintenance mode, and then you have a surge mode, where
yes,
during this time, you're going to have a lot more output, and you kind of need to allow yourself, like, know that there's going to be an end to it, and know that you're going to have some recovery afterward. Is that accurate?
Accurate. Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to circle back as well to what you talked about earlier with the empathy in that, because especially in the psychological field, but really in anything where you are pouring into helping someone else work through their pain, it becomes so important in this area, in the self-care area, where a lot of people can begin to carry other people's stuff too much. And how do you maintain that line where you have empathy for someone, but you don't let it take you down the drain?
That's a tough one. Sometimes it's easy for people who are called to serve others. We have to develop certain disciplines, and one of those is like just having healthy boundaries. Like this is the person I'm serving. This is your journey, not mine. What's that guy? Do you want me to walk with them, like arm, like lockstep with them? Okay, fine. Yeah, some of that does get on me, and it can get messy sometimes. In a strictly clinical environment, that doesn't happen. Okay, I hope I'm not losing you in the conversation here. But in a strictly clinical environment, like say working in a treatment center, it doesn't happen. I can, the empathy is there, but when at the end of the day, when it's time to go home, that's it. That's a transactional relationship. Your insurance is paying for you to be here. Okay. You are bringing your problems to me, and I am giving you my best self. I've taken care of myself. I've gone to the gym in the morning. I did my reading and my praying. I'm showing up my best version of myself, and I'm giving you the best that I have. Now, when that transaction is over, I have given you my best. Now it's time for me to take my time back, and you have to go work on yourself, and we will meet again tomorrow. When it's not in that clinical space, when it's more of like let's say just for brevity's sake, like a ministry experience and really walking with somebody in their dark space, then it gets really difficult because you really are picking up your brother's cross or your sister's cross and carrying it with them. And then it becomes much more relational. And then it becomes more like, hey, I'm carrying more of this than you are. Are you manipulating me? Well, no, I'm not doing that. Well, I think you are. Well, now we have to argue, kind of thing. But it takes a certain amount of resilience and insight, to be able to see who you're dealing with. And also the self-awareness piece is to know when we're lying to ourselves. Because if we're lying to ourselves, we're not being honest in the situation. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it does. And it brought to mind something that for our companies, we have what are called healer support groups, people who are working to heal other people, and it gives them a place to go. We're starting that up, gives them a place to go where they can share each other's burdens as healers. And one of the things that I did, kind of based off of my own journey in walking with someone with a chronic illness, is I actually developed a 12 steps, or I call them 12 lessons, for like healer companions, or someone who is there with someone else as they are healing. And you really touched on some of the key points in that journey of like recognizing that this is that person's journey and I can help them on it. That's actually one of the steps. This is their journey and I can help them on that, but I can't take it for them. And whether or not they go on that journey, like I need to be okay. Mm-hmm. And learning how to walk that out. So it's really, you touched on some of the really, like some of the major steps in that. And there are some parallels. It's not exactly the same, like you said, with the clinical situation. There's a certain amount of like, I can close shop at the end of the day and go home. But especially for those who are like in a live-in situation, or they're with someone in a more kind of intimate setting, it can be crucial, because if you don't have that, a lot of people think that if I have good boundaries, or if I say no to this person, let's translate it to what more like what they would say. Like, if I say no to this person, then I'm not being loving to them. I'm not helping them, all that stuff. But like you said, like you mentioned a little bit ago, if you don't take care of yourself, you're going to have to leave the fight. And it's actually going to do long-term damage to yourself and to the relationship, if not to that person. And so the idea of learning to walk in such a way that you are able to maintain your own even keel, regardless of what they do, and maintain your own health, because to prevent the bitterness, really, the bitterness against the client that you're working with or the person that you're working with. So in my experience, a lot of that bitterness comes from when they don't navigate that well and they start carrying more than the other person, like you talked about. Is that accurate to your experience?
Yes, completely.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you use, or your clients use, or the people that, what are some of the resources that you would recommend for people who are either they're starting on their journey or they are in a practice of their own in a similar field? What are some resources that you found helpful, that people that you've worked with have found helpful? What are some things?
So you're talking about like the healers, those
either the healer or the people who are on their own healing journey. What are some of the resources that you found? We've talked a lot about like AA and CODA and that sort of thing, but are there any other books, channels, speakers, like any other type of resources, websites that you might have in mind?
Oh goodness. Well, again, like almost everything I'm dealing with right now is like veteran centric. So there's like lots of those. I almost want to say like anything that's within reach. And that's it's kind of a dangerous thing to say, because like a bottle of beer might be like within reach. A person's listening, they're like, oh, Dave just told me I could drink. That's not what I'm saying. If I am gaining this awareness that I have a problem, like I've suddenly become aware, that I'm in a lot of pain, I've been carrying pain for years, or my drinking is out of control or something like that, like reaching up, and I'm being a little metaphorical, but like I said, like with me, like getting online and ask, that's a resource. And then what's the next one after that? So rather than saying like, oh, here's a list of things, here's, the good treatment centers, or, this is an organization, or here, these are some people, like those things might not be accessible for a billion different reasons why they're not accessible in that moment. Right. But if I'm truly trying to get better, there is something, and it might be the sun. It might be stepping outside for the first time in 3 days, and then from there, like, oh, getting some fresh air. I just remembered my friend I haven't talked to in 5 years said I could call anytime. You know what I mean? And then that person might know how to reach a call center that can connect me with a treatment center that can get me on a plane, that kind of thing.
Like, what's the next step?
Absolutely. Here's how I want to qualify that statement. And I was working in a group today, and we were talking about this. So there's, like right now I'm working in a treatment center. It's a brand new program for veterans and first responders, right? And so I'm in a room full of veterans and first responders. And for like the first time since the start, about 5 weeks ago when we opened the doors, the group really took off. Like they started having this had this deep existential discussion about their struggles and the meaning of it all. And they were getting more from each other than I ever could have brought into the conversation. And I believe that the reason why is because they relate to each other. They don't relate to me. Like I can go in and say, I'm a vet. I served here. I went to that place. You've been there before. Yeah, we identify, oh yeah, you remember the town hall, blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. My sobriety date is March 13th, 2010. I don't remember what it's like to be a week out since my last drink. But the guy sitting next to the other guy, or the gal sitting next to the guy over there, they're still in that struggle, and they identify. And then there's the camaraderie, and then there's like that different there's that I'm talking to you and you're talking to me, and you're seeing something in me that I can't see. So they're recognizing these things in each other, and they're lifting each other up. Right. So that's it. It's like the reaching up. They're reaching up together kind of thing. Again, I'm not 100% sure that makes sense. But like that's what was available to them at that exact moment.
Well, we have been around the world in an hour. We have gone into so many different things, and really the inner world. We've been around the inner world in an hour of identity and trauma and addiction, and all these just really deep, important things that the struggle can turn someone's life upside down, but the healing process can turn someone's life upside right, if I'm saying that right. And thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you for what you've brought into this conversation, into this channel. It's been an amazing ride. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Are you a healer, teacher, coach, or some other kind of wellness professional? Well, we have some resources that we designed specifically for you. You see, I believe we are on the edge of a new stage of human civilization, and people like you are going to lead the way. If you're interested in learning more, head over to benniscompanies.com/7-part healer, or hit the link in the description below to see what it's all about. See you there.